Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Some time ago when I used to teach high school, I thought long and hard about one of the main problems we have here in the developed West, and that has to do with the continued infantilization of our subsequent generations. With each generation, we are raising children, perpetualized children, and that's a problem. Because when I used to look around my classroom and see that room full of 18-year-olds just simply unable to function as adults embracing full social responsibility and the consequences of their actions thereof, it became increasingly clear to me that there was a horrible defunct in formation, particularly with regard to faith, with philosophy and reason, to be sure. We expect so little of them in terms of the life of the mind, and yet we expect so much of them when it comes to STEM education, to be sure. And history, a real immersion in history from a sound, objective perspective. I'm not talking about social science and skewing it from a progressivist lens. I'm talking about being real students of history. And I want to focus on boys here. When boys stop studying history, they lose more than school subjects. They lose a sense of proportion about their role in society and the world. They lose what one would call social memory and a working sense of duty that ought to be undergirding every single individual in the society. Boys especially will lose a standard by which they ought to measure themselves, which is against the men of previous generations who were required to grow up early and who actually did and accomplished magnificent things. And after that loss, our society then hands them glowing screens and therapeutic slogans, and we call that maturity. And that's an extremely efficient way to produce adult-sized children who speak endlessly about their identity and self-expression and have no concept of the duty they owe to society and the common good. As a student of history myself, a constant student of history, I can tell you right now, history gives boys an encounter with consequence. It teaches them that ideas can become social structures. Those social structures can then become laws. Those laws can become habits. And those habits can form anywhere from regimes to governments to whole nations. But those regimes then have an impact on your home, your church, your market, your work, your school, what have you. And that's why a boy who studies history begins to see that liberty has a lineage. Disorder also has one. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration at age 33, or his monstrous contribution to it was at age 33. Madison was 36 at the Constitutional Convention. Washington had already become a professional surveyor at 17. He completed his first survey within 2 days of receiving his commission. These men were young, they were serious, they were entrusted with tasks that would shape whole civilizations. These were not men waiting for permission to become adults at age 32 or after one final era of needing to travel to the East to quote-unquote find themselves. And that's a big part of the problem today. We've stretched adolescence into a lifestyle, and now we market it in the name of liberty, of discovering yourself. In the United States, 18% of adults aged 25 to 34 continue to live in their parents' basement or in their parents' home. This was in 2023. Young men did so more often than young women. 20% of men did this. 15% of young women did this. Meanwhile, the median age at first marriage has risen to about 31. For men. Now, some of this comes from a lot of economic reasons, housing costs, unstable work, delayed earning, and they're real serious social pressures. But some of it also comes from a culture that has trained young men to defer responsibility for as long as possible, and that permanent postponement is an option. I'm saying some of it on purpose, because I don't want to exaggerate. The economy matters. Wages matter, housing matters, family breakdown matters, sure. But historical illiteracy is what I want to focus on here. Boys who never meet Washington the surveyor, Jefferson the draftsman, Madison the constitutional architect, Hamilton the author, they all begin to assume that manhood is this recreational thing with employment being the unfortunate tack on. And so they absorb the lie that that kind of seriousness only belongs to old men, and even then not all of them, just some of them in society, especially those who wind up in portraits, and that youth can be prolonged and exists for self-expression. 50 is the new 40, 60 is the new, what have you. History shatters that illusion. History actually tells us that a boy that has youth has often been at that age for apprenticeship, of sacrifice, command, courage, public usefulness. John Adams, one of my favorite founding fathers, had a severe sense of speaking about this. I must study politics and war, that my sons may have liberty to study painting and poetry, mathematics and philosophy. That's the theory of civilization, my friends. One generation accepts burden so that the next may inherit a certain sense of order, but that doesn't mean that the next one is then devoid of the duty of accepting burden themselves. One generation needs to learn what is costly and build what is lovely so that the next generation can learn to appreciate that as well. Boys need that truth. It introduces them to delayed gratification, to heroism in virtue. It teaches boys that the adult life is not about self-consumption. It's about stewardship across generations after you. You build that others may appreciate long after you're gone. That's serving the common good. That's why history humbles a boy, but it doesn't humiliate him. It's a great teacher. It shows him that men of genius and men of vice can not only coexist with each other, very often they are the same person. We can think about the fact that Jefferson was a brilliant defender of liberty, but at the same time he was entangled in slavery and he was a deist. Washington had extraordinary discipline, and he had to navigate the brutal world of 18th century power. The founders were not plastered saints. We can't canonize them. But we also don't want to caricaturize them into villains. These were men acting within a particularly contested moral world. And that's precisely why studying them forms right judgment. A boy then learns to admire greatness where greatness is, but also to detect failure where failure is, to resist the childish urge to flatten every historical figure into either saints or monsters, which unfortunately is the childishness we are seeing in particularly progressivist movements when it comes to how they assess history. In fact, I believe that if we all became real, honest students of history, that would improve public discourse by several miles. Our present civic ignorance is not by chance. This is exactly why we are where we are. We wonder why every social argument gets swallowed by hysteria. Well, it's because we are people without history. And if we are people without being steeped in history, we become easy to flatter, but also easy to frighten and intimidate. Every controversy sounds unprecedented. Oh, we've never faced anything like this before. Every election is apocalyptic. This is the most important election in history of the United States. Or every activist claim seems to be the first prophet of justice. No one else has ever said this before. This prophet is saying it. Every grifter will sell their truth as novelty to people because they don't know the history well enough to know that it's been taught before and sold before. And that's why the study of history can help resolve a lot of social problems. Partially, not entirely. Christ is the real panacea here. It doesn't wave away sin or heal every wound or close every budget gap, but it gives citizens a moral imagination, a political antibody, if you will. It teaches young men how republics rise, but also how they decay, how to prevent that decay, how to build that civilization. Freedom requires self-command, that institutions become fragile when the people inside them become frivolous. In the face of all of this, I challenge everyone, give a boy history and you give him a mirror large enough to expose his smallness without crushing his spirit. So steep him in the fathers, let him get to know them. In fact, that gift might actually start a minor revolution for the good. Stay tuned, I'm Marcus Peter.